All right. So after a interesting start to our interview today, we have each other here. We started off in totally different locations, and now here we are. We finally got it to work. And you are on your cell phone. We're doing this through Make It Work. I have to tell you. So now I'm kind of like a virtual librarian. So I'm showcasing my shirt today. It's the virtually librarians can do virtually anything.
I believe that.
So, all right. So we're here. We're going to talk about your Sherlock Holmes book, which I am halfway through. I have to just, I'll own it, but I am making some pretty good headway. It's awesome so far. I love it. But I didn't want to postpone our interview. I wanted to get going ahead and talk about it because it's such a cool book.
Well, thank you, Becca. I really enjoyed writing this one. I hope it's half as much fun for everybody reading it as it was for me to write it.
Yeah, it should be. Should be. It's good so far. And so should we tell everybody where this is Sherlock Holmes in Little London. They can probably see it better on the slide than my little book here.
Right.
But Little London, we're referring to Colorado Springs.
Yes, during the Victorian era, which is when this takes place, 1896, Colorado Springs was known as Little London. And that goes back to General Palmer, who, had a connection to England and Queen Palmer. And so they really tried to stay with that Victorian theme in building Colorado Springs and Glen Erie Castle.
Nice. And for the people that live in Colorado Springs, this is, well, anywhere in Colorado, as long as they've been to Colorado Springs, they'll know what Garden of the Gods is, Glen Erie Castle, Manitou Springs, and to hear the names, or to read the names. Of course, I have it playing in my head like a movie, so I hear them. But it's kind of neat to hear a reference to the Briarhurst Manor and all these different places where I've been, and it's just kind of fun.
It is, and Cripple Creek, several of the chapters take place in Cripple Creek, and you can go there and you can walk the streets, Bennett Avenue, and you can actually see what they would have seen in 1896 when they were there. So I'm really pleased with how it came out.
Yeah, it's a really fun book. I've liked all of your books so far that I've read, and this is holding up. You've got a good reputation going here, John.
Well, thank you. I worked hard on this one to try to be true to the voice of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and to his characters and the setting. I think what really was a help to me was I have been a fan of Sherlock Holmes since I was a young boy. I believe the first book I ever remember reading cover to cover was Silver Blaze, and I think I was probably, I don't know, second or third grade, but it really stuck with me. And then I've read all 56 short stories and the 4 novels. And what I really love about Sherlock Holmes in the mysteries is that it resonates with so many people all over the world of different ages and different gender backgrounds, cultural heritages, but it's timeless. And I think it is as relevant today as it was 150 years ago when the very first one was published. And in the 60 books that make the canon of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, with Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, Dr. Watson, that they span almost 4 decades. He was a prolific writer. Sometimes he'd turn out 1 or 2 or 3 books, even in a calendar year. But what was always a mystery was that he wrote right up into the end of 1895, and then there's this gap that's always been there in 1896, and he doesn't publish anything until the very end of 1896, that at the end of November 1896. So there's always been this question, this mystery. Well, where was Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in 1896? So what the book does is shares that mystery, and we now finally know where they spent 1896.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So shall we start with your presentation? You can tell us all about your book.
Yes, and let me use this first slide here to comment on the cover. I am so proud of how the cover came out, and my publisher, Wildlight Press, and specifically Don Collas, who designed the cover. And in the background, you can see that tower. And for those of you that know the Colorado Springs area, this was the south tower of the original Antlers Hotel. Now, as it existed during the Victoria era, and it's since been replaced twice, the hotel has. But I really am proud of how Don captured the dust cover and designed and produced the book. Then if we go to the next slide, which is chapter 1, I want to mention as we go through these 12 slides, they're the 12 chapters of the book, and I don't want to give away the ending because Becca and everybody else that'll be reading this, I don't want you to say, oh, now I know how it ends. But I do want to point out a couple things as we go through the slides. In the lower left under chapter, you see what's referred to as the ordinary world. And what this book does is it follows the hero's journey. And I've used that in my science fiction novel with Zach Box and the Pearls of Pleiades. And many of you are probably familiar with the hero's journey, but it works so well in a novel, and it really fit beautifully into this missing year. And so as we go through each of the 12 chapters, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner what that part of the hero's journey entails. And they always start out in the ordinary world. And as you look at this slide, you can see this setting of Sherlock Holmes' study, his fireplace, and when you read his novels, there's different things that it talks about, you know, in his how the study was decorated, and the Persian slipper on the fireplace mantle, and other things. Of course, in the lower right-hand corner, all the Sherlock Holmes fans that are watching this recognize the famous address, 221B Baker Street, which is the flat that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson shared. One of the things that's always fascinating to me in reading this is all of the stories, that the 56 short stories, 4 novels, are written in first person from Dr. John Watson's point of view. And if any of you watching are familiar with the 2 movies, the Sherlock Holmes movies that Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law did, they had such a wonderful chemistry between those 2 characters. But now we're going to get my dog in the background here. I think I must have a delivery truck. So I'm sorry about that. We'll just keep pressing it. And he'll settle down.
He wants to be on film too.
He's going to want to come in and get a cookie or a milk bowl. But anyway, let's just keep going. So that starts in the ordinary world. And what I'm doing is I'm using this PowerPoint slide as my outline for the book when I'm writing it. And so when I'm doing chapter 1, I want to make sure that I'm covering everything that's depicted in the bottom. So the teacup has an important part, the telegram that he gets that is a coded message from his brother Mycroft. Let's go to the next slide. So it's chapter 2. In the call, in the hero's journey, you always have a call to adventure. And in this case, the call to adventure was the telegram that Sherlock Holmes got at 221B Baker Street that turns out to be a request to meet the Queen of England, Queen Victoria, on the south tower of the London Tower Bridge, which is what's being shown here at the top. So I've never been to London, but you know, with the internet, you can travel anywhere in the world. And so what I'm doing is, as I'm building these slides that'll serve as kind of my storyboard or an electronic storyboard using PowerPoint, what I'm doing is I'm placing a picture, an image, or clip art across that one slide, and from that I'll actually be able to write that chapter and make sure I have everything in there. Where it works so well if we have any aspiring writers who want to try this, is you can move things around, you know, just by taking something from one slide to the next. So this story is about a counterfeit ring that was working in England, London area. And it's one of the two cases that Sherlock Holmes was never able to solve. And so this counterfeiting ring escapes in the middle of the night from outside of Reading near London. And then, so that was also what I was trying to tie in, is that Sherlock Holmes is one of his two unsolved cases. Now we know it gets solved, so we can keep an almost perfect record for it with him. Let's go to the next slide. That's chapter 3, and this image at the top is Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law having a conversation about this adventure they're going on in the case. And in the hero's journey, you see in the lower left that all the heroes always have to have a helper. Sometimes, you know, it could be a spiritual helper, it could be a guide, it could be a sorceress, or you know, somebody. But you know, that's part of the theme. So in this case, they have to leave England, London. They're on the luxury liner, the RMS Republic, and then they're coming to America. And this is their first time to come to the United States. And so what I'm building on the bottom of the slide is I want to make sure that we incorporate some references to opera. And for those Sherlock Holmes fans, you'll enjoy that the woman, Irene Adler, makes an appearance in 1896. So that's a fun part of this story. Let's go to the next slide, Becca, chapter 4, Crossing the Threshold. So in the hero's journey, there's always a point when the hero is on the call to adventure, when they accept it, and they reach that point where there's no turning back. That's where they're crossing the threshold. So in this case, they cross the threshold when the ship arrives in New York Harbor. They're sailing past the Statue of Liberty, and they have a conversation about that. And what's happened on the cruise over, they've had a chance to meet some really fascinating people. Excuse me, I want to get a drink of water. And this was one of the fun things to write of the crossing, but also when they arrive in New York City. And what they want to do is they want to, Sherlock Holmes wants to meet with Mark Twain. And so what I was able to do was to figure out what would be the perfect adventure place for them to meet in this adventure. And I chose Delmonico's in Manhattan. They're staying at the Waldorf Astoria. And so I'm putting some description, some actual clip art and photos down at the bottom to make sure that I'm incorporating, you know, kind of a visual description of what that is. And they're also wanting to meet with Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. And so Mark Twain does that introduction. So one of the things that I did to try to pick up the voice of Sherlock Holmes through John Watson is to read several chapters right up to 1895. And then I went back, and where there was a film clip of one of the characters that I was talking about, then I would listen to that and watch that. And a good example was with Mark Twain. And there was some wonderful, they were old black and white grainy videos, but the audio was good and you could see him talking. And same way with Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, there was some little historical vignettes of them speaking, so you could pick up their languages. So I tried to emulate that as I was writing that part of the story. Let's go to chapter 5. Now we arrive in Colorado Springs, Little London, and they're staying as a guest of General Palmer at Glen Erie Castle. And this setting is such a beautiful setting, but also has an important role to play because what is going to happen is Sherlock Holmes and John Watson together go to Cripple Creek. And let's go to the next slide. This is now chapter 6. And they end up being underground and trapped in a mine. And there's an explosion that was intentionally set by the bad guys who were trying to kill Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And so they go through this struggle to come out of the cave, but they realize that the bad guys are onto them. They know that they're there. And so what has to happen is Sherlock Holmes goes undercover, and Dr. Watson returns to Glen Eyrie Castle, and he spends time there during 1896, over a month that he ends up staying. Now, if we go to the next slide, chapter.
Hang on. Do you mind? I want to just go back a slide just for a second, because there may be people watching that don't know, but this castle, Glen Eyrie Castle, you can go in there, you can have a tour. This is still up and running, fully functional, all the original stuff, plumbing, and I mean, this is a very cool thing that people can do, and it'd probably be a good reason for people to come on a vacation just to see this castle.
Oh, I'm so glad you came back to that. Are you back on chapter 5? So you're showing a view of the castle?
I am. I came in just to let people see that picture.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you did. And right now with the COVID concerns, they're a little limited, but they are allowing people to reserve one of the bedrooms. I think they have 7 or 8 guest suites that you can rent, and you can stay there. And we were going to do the book launch there, but of course with COVID, they're not allowing crowds. But we have been in touch with the historian there at Glen Eyrie Castle, and as soon as we open up, they'll allow us to come in and do a book talk and a tour. And they're not doing this yet, but when they do open back up, if you want a real treat, make a reservation for high tea. If you've never done,
I have done that.
You have
it. Awesome.
It really is an extraordinary thing, and it's a wonderful, like a Mother's Day present or Valentine's or something really, really special. But their high tea is a wonderful experience, and you will have a high tea in England, in London, at the end of the book. So if you've not done high tea, it's a wonderful way to kind of experience what the book's introducing you to. Thanks for going back to that one. And
by the way, when you do your book launch and you do this there, let me know. I would love to come.
Oh, I'd love to have you. Maybe we could announce it for, all of the patrons there at the library. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll get back on track. We get distracted.
That's okay. Okay. Stop on chapter 6 again, because I wanted to point this out at the bottom. And from what I've tried to do is to be historically accurate as well as geographically accurate. So one of the things that Sherlock Holmes always struggled with was a addiction to cocaine, and he when he was inactive in between cases, he drank too much alcohol and the drug use, and that really concerned Dr. Watson. Not only was he his physician, he was his friend, and so we see that struggle, that concern. But one of the other things that Sherlock Holmes did was he was very adept at the sport of boxing, and so he never missed an opportunity to get in the ring with a worthy opponent, especially bare knuckle boxing. And that was a way for him to sharpen his skills, his self-defense skills. He didn't care, if he wasn't out for the prize money or anything like that. All he really wanted to do was to be tested and improve his skills as a pugilist, as a boxer. So I work in Jack Dempsey. This is a picture of Jack Dempsey, who fought under the ring name the Manassas Mauler. And for historians, you're probably familiar with the small town of Manassas in southern Colorado in San Luis Valley, and that's where the name, the Manassas Mauler, comes from. So I again tried to stay true to what were his strengths, his weaknesses, what were his interests. So let's see. Let's go to chapter 7. One of the things that was happening, not only just Colorado Springs, but around the world, was a horrific epidemic with tuberculosis. And that brought a lot of patients to the Colorado Springs area, which brought a lot of healthcare providers and doctors. And so in the book, we have Dr. Watson meeting with Dr. William Bell, who was one of the partners that General Palmer had in starting the railroad, the Denver Rio Grande, several businesses. And so they were business partners, but Dr. Bell is a real physician. And so the storyline here is describing some of the tuberculosis sanitariums and sanatoriums that were in the Colorado Springs, Manitou area during the time. So we talk about that. There's actually 2 fires that happened in Cripple Creek. Let's go to the next slide. So we're on chapter 8, and that has the ordeal. And the two fires are 4 days apart, and they're arson. And the first one burnt down like a quarter of or a third of Cripple Creek, and then 4 days later another fire happens, and it burns down like another third of the town. The town was built originally out of wood frame because it was faster, and there's only just 1 or 2 brick buildings. But when they did rebuild the town of Cripple Creek, they rebuilt it with brick. And so what we see today, the facades are the original buildings that were rebuilt after the 1896 fires, the 2 fires. So that has a very prominent role in the book, so that those actually occur and those dates are correct. This in the bottom, again under the main photo there, you'll see on the bottom left is a picture of Cripple Creek's, what it looks like today. This is the historic City Hall on the left, and on the right's the fire department as it looks today. But that would have been the building that would have been rebuilt in late 1896, early 1997. I do talk about some of the people that were there and things that happened on the far right. One of the terrible things that happened in Colorado Springs in 1896 was the murder of the very first police officer killed in the line of duty in Colorado Springs. His name was Benjamin Franklin Bish. And so I've worked in, for those of you that don't know, I'm a retired Colorado Springs police officer. I had 22 years with the police department there, and then I was the elected sheriff in El Paso County, Colorado for 2 terms. So I had 30 years in law enforcement. And so one of the things I've done is pay tribute to Officer Bish and his service and sacrifice by mentioning him through this story, so that his service is not forgotten. So I'm tying in wherever possible historically accurate information. Probably, I don't know, maybe 80–90% of the story is historically accurate. Now I'm putting it in first person, which changes the creates that dialogue. But I think everybody's going to enjoy this scene in chapter 9. This is the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in Durango, and you can still ride that train. It's really a beautiful destination. You go from Durango to Silverton, especially in the fall when the aspen leaves are turning. But in the hero's journey, there's almost always a chase scene, a flight, and in this case, we have Sherlock and Dr. Watson chasing one of the bad guys, Dr. Bakersley, and they end up going from Little London to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then Flagstaff, Arizona, and all the way to Los Angeles, California, then San Francisco. And then if you go to chapter 10, and in the hero's journey, this begins what's referred to as the return. So you cross the threshold, you've had the ordeal, you're coming to the climax, the kind of the story arc, and that's what we have here. And the pursuit now is with Sherlock and Dr. Watson chasing Dr. Bakersley into Canada, into the Yukon. And in 1896 was the gold rush in Canada, Alaska. And so they've gone from the gold rush in Cripple Creek, which was known at the time as the greatest gold camp on earth. And now this is the very opening months of the Yukon. And so there's tens of thousands of people pouring into the Yukon, and especially into Dawson City. And that's what the city is there. So I needed them to be on a sailing ship to go from San Francisco up to Dawson City in Canada. So I picked, the name of the ship is the Gloria Scott II. And for those of you that recognize the name Gloria Scott, that was the name of a sailing ship in the original Sherlock Holmes stories. So I brought the name back as the Gloria Scott II. It's an old whaling ship. It's one of my favorite scenes is where they're on that ship, and the characters and the things that they do on the ship, the adventures that they have. The captain of the ship, he's a character. So what I've tried to do was, as they're chasing these international counterfeiters all the way to the United States, across the country, and they're going to end up crossing the ocean and literally traveling all the way around the world by the time this adventure ends. And they've been on the luxury, one of the most magnificent luxury liners, the RMS Republic. They've had dinner at the captain's table, and now they're on this old sailing ship, this whaling ship that smells, and they're having to, continually pump the bilge, out into the ocean. And so you have this old, sea captain, and they're sleeping in the one of my favorite settings, the Bucksnort Saloon in Dawson City. So they went from staying at the Waldorf Astoria and having dinner at Delmonico's to eating squid soup, that Chef Medville fixes on the Gloria Scott II. So you're seeing this dichotomy of the very finest of travel accommodations in 1896 to the very worst, but it's really was a fun thing to write about. Now, what has happened during their adventures is, as always, John Watson is the one who is capturing all the details, who they met when, where they were certain times, and he's also tracking their finances, because this is really a costly adventure that they're on. And they had an unlimited line of credit from the Royal Bank. And so he's being very diligent about capturing all that information in the details of, the culprits and things in a black pocket notebook that he carried on him. But he, just to make sure that it didn't get discovered by the bad guys, he kept it in a hidden vault above the fireplace in Glen Erie Castle. And so what happens, and again, I'm getting ahead of you, Becca, and I don't mean to ruin this. So,
no, that's fine.
So what happens is he gets separated from his notebook, and it gets left behind in Glen Erie Castle. And then it doesn't get discovered until April of 2020, last year, which is part of the reason we don't know anything about this adventure until now, until the present time. So that factors in here, what this missing notebook. So here is just an image that I really liked from the movie that showed Dr. Watson just regretting not having, his notebook, and he has to start a new notebook. And Sherlock, I just love the expression on Robert Downey Jr.'s face. It's two couples, they bicker back and forth, but they have that chemistry between them. So I've tried to capture that.
Nice.
Let's go.
You got it.
Let's go to chapter 11. You'll recognize this scene because that's in Glen Erie Castle, and that's one of the rooms. It's called the music room. It's one of the rooms where they have high tea. Is that the room that you were in, or do you remember?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful room. Well, that room was the actual music room for General Palmer, and that existed 1896. Now in the movie, in the book, I'm having them having high tea back in London at one of the famous places there in London. I'm glad I slipped there and said movie, because it's one of the things I meant to mention at the beginning. For those of you like me that are interested in writing a book and maybe following the hero's journey, one of the beautiful things about this, not only is it timeless, the hero's journey goes back at least 2,000 years to more than that, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and to Jason and the Argonauts and Achilles, so that formula has worked, for 2,000 years, or more. And but it also serves itself well to a 3-act screenplay. So the chapters of the book in the hero's journey fit in the first part of the movie, the introduction, into the middle part of the movie, which has your story arc in the climax, and then at the end, the last couple chapters begins this return home with the elixir or whatever they were after. So it's whatever they're returning home with. Sometimes it's just knowledge or wisdom, but they're on their way home in the 11th chapter, and so I'm tying back in at the bottom some of the closing things that happen there. Then if we go to chapter 12, this is the last chapter in the book, and now they're home and they're receiving their rewards. And again, I don't want to spoil the story. You can kind of pick up maybe some hints at the bottom, but they end up leaving on January 20th, or getting notification that the telegram arrives January 20th, 1896, and the story goes through the whole year and ends on Christmas Eve of 1896. And so what I'm doing in laying out the story, the outline, is I'm putting a couple little presents down at the bottom in front of the image of the castle, and that's where they're back home. That's where they receive their rewards. Then let's just go to the very last slide. That's slide 14. And people always ask, okay, I can check this out of the library, but what if I want my own copy? How do I get that? Well, my books are on Amazon. If you want your own book, you want to purchase one, you can just log on Amazon, enter my name as the author or the title of the book. All the books should be on there except for number 6. We're getting that one put on there, but I know that one's in the library. I don't know if you have number 7 on here or not, but that one is being updated, and it'll be available through Engram Distributing. But I want to mention the top one, number 1, because that's the next book that I have coming out this year, 2021. And I think this is going to really be one that all of your patrons there at the library are really going to enjoy. It's A to Z, Colorado's Nearly Forgotten History, 1776 to 1876. So it takes place from the time when America is first created, with the Declaration of Independence. Excuse me, I got to take another sip of water.
We are making you talk a lot.
Well, I'm enjoying it. I hope everybody else is too. So it goes from a 100-year period from when we are first, America is first created, to when Colorado becomes a state, 1876. So we become the 38th state added to the United States of America. So that 100-year period is a really important period of history. But a lot of people, they're not aware of that history. They think, it wasn't until we become a state, that history starts to take hold. But before that, we were part of Spain and part of the, especially where you're at, Becca, you were in part of the French Empire, and if you lived in southern Colorado, you were part of Mexico. And so it's just a wonderful a part of the nearly forgotten history, and each letter of the alphabet is a separate short story. So we have A's for Anza, B's for Buffalo Soldiers, C is for Cherry Creek, and D is for Dog Soldiers. So you can go to each of the chapters, you can read them in any or do you want? So we'll have to come back and we'll have to do another author talk in a few months when that one's finally out.
Yeah, and I really like that all of your stuff, you touch on history. Even your sci-fi book, the Zach Fox and the Pearls of Pleiades, you reference and you honor that history, and I just like that. I like learning from what has happened before.
Yeah, me too. When I read a book, I love the little extra things that you didn't know you're going to get. You know, it may be a history, just a little vignette, or it may be something about the geographical area. You know, and what I love is you can actually go there today and look at those places. They were real then, they're real now, and you can scan like my Sheriff Kelly books. You know, you can go to some of the places where he stood, where he mounted his horse, where he, you know, had a shootout, and it's, to me, it just really makes the history come alive. So I enjoy that. So I've tried to do that with all of my books.
Yeah, yeah. And let's see. So for people who don't live in Colorado Springs or have not been there, there is a statue of General Palmer downtown.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
I don't. We don't have anything for Nikola Tesla, do we?
No, but you know what? He was here in Colorado Springs.
He was.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I slip into the conversation in 1896, because he doesn't get here until I think it's 1899 or a few years later, and so I have as Nikola Tesla is walking Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, you know, from their meeting, he says, "Where are you two off to next?" And they say, "Well, Colorado Springs, little London." And he says, "Oh, you know, I've heard of that place. I've been looking for some place with some altitude where I can do some of my experiments. And would you let me know, you know, what it was like?" And so, so that gets worked into the story. And then when they're back home, they've returned now to London. There's a little note card, you know, that thanks them from Nikola Tesla and some of the other people that they've met, you know, along the way. So it kind of came full circle back for them. And of course, those of you that are fans, you know, that you know the important role that Mrs. Hudson plays, and you know, she's their landlady. And so she, you know, is at the beginning and at the end of the story. One of the changes I had to make, you might find this interesting, Becca, is in the first edition, and I think that's the edition you're reading here, in the very back when they returned, Mrs. Hudson's welcoming them back and fixed them a nice dinner with beef Wellington and you know, a couple, you know, vegetables and some other things. But for dessert, I've not been to London, to England, so I kind of, you know, was trying to come up with a menu, what she'd be fixing them for their welcome home dinner. And I thought, well, they'll need a dessert, and so I picked Yorkshire pudding. Have you ever had or fixed Yorkshire pudding? Neither had I, but it sounded delicious. Sounded like a real British kind of a thing. And after the first 50 books went out, a friend of mine who has been to London, she sent me a quick email. She says, "Oh, John, I loved your book. It was really nice. You had 2 or 3 little typos. Here they are." And she said, "I have to tell you that I was surprised too to find out that Yorkshire pudding isn't a dessert. It's actually a main meal, and it's a pastry kind of a thing, and you can sometimes have like beef or lamb, and it's a gravy, and you can have mushrooms, but it's an entree. It's a main meal. It's not a dessert." And so I thought, well, I can't have the book ending with Mrs. Hudson, you know, serving, you know, Yorkshire pudding when it's not for dessert. It's not even a dessert. So I had to go back through and search what would be a good what's the #1 British dessert, and it turns out to be sticky toffee pudding. And so I had to take out Yorkshire and put in sticky toffee. And so the future editions, but it was one of the fun things, little less known facts about writing stories. So the book you have, when you come across Yorkshire pudding, you'll know that was not technically correct. So it was nice I was able to correct that. Anyway,
Yeah.
this has been so much fun. Do you have any final questions before we sign off?
Well, I do have just one. You know, I'm always going to have a question.
Great. I love
Back
that.
a couple slides,
Uh-huh.
you honored that first police officer that got
Mhm.
killed.
Yeah.
Do you know if he still has any family in Colorado?
Oh, what a good question. I know at the time he was killed, he had a brother that was on the city council, and he was married and had a daughter. And I know that daughter grew up to adulthood, but I don't know if she had children. This is his actual grave that we're showing there, and you might notice it's shaped like a veteran's grave. And he was a veteran from the Indian Wars, and so that was he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery, not far from where General Palmer's buried, and Sheriff Rankin Scott Kelly's buried there. So a couple times a year, I'll go, and it's kind of like, visiting old friends. I'll stop at one, grave, and then I'll go to the next one to pay my respects. But Benjamin Franklin Bish did have some family, but I think that's kind of been lost to history, where his great-great-grandchildren would be. But that would be a good thing to know.
Yeah, I was just curious because, as I don't know, we don't make too big of a deal, but my mother-in-law is related to Glenn Morris, who was a gold medal athlete, and he was awarded his gold medal right in front of Hitler, the Olympics over there.
Right.
And so it's just kind of neat, even though that's been quite a long time,
Right.
there's still that thing of, yeah, that's a relative. So I was just curious if there was a family member, they might be curious to know that their relative was mentioned in a book.
Yeah, I had, when I was on the police department, I think, let's see, I had 5 or 6 close friends. There were 9 officers killed in the line of duty that I knew. 5 or 6 were close personal friends, and their pictures are hung on the wall, and with honor. But Benjamin Franklin Bish's name had been lost, and it wasn't until about 1994, 95, another police officer who loves history along with me, we were able to recover that, and then we added him to the wall of honor. So part of the reason I try to incorporate these stories is so that, again, that their service is not lost.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to take us back to this last slide again so that we can let people see your books. This is your list of books. And the number 6 book is a nonfiction, and the number 4 book is fiction.
Correct, historical fiction. And that's the order I wrote them. So I wrote the nonfiction first, got all the historical facts, and then still was a little disappointed that we couldn't fill in those gaps historically with accurate content, because sometimes you just have a little newspaper clipping of a shootout or something. And so what I did was I wrote the historical fiction number 4 to kind of fill in those gaps. So, and both of those books are in the library collection now.
Yep, I think
the challenge. Did you read both of those, haven't you, Becca?
No, I have not, because my librarian cohorts grabbed them out of the shelf before I got to them.
So we'll have to get a second book in there. But the challenge is, and it's a reader's choice, is would you prefer, Becca, to read the historical fiction first and then go back and read the nonfiction so you know what the facts are? Or would you prefer to read, so you know the facts, and then when you get the historical fiction, you'll know where it deviates? What would be your preference?
I would probably read the historical fiction first,
Yeah,
and then go back, and
right.
Because then it kind of whets your appetite.
Yeah, it does.
Get the nonfiction.
Yeah. So I hope everyone watching this will take the time to read both of those. I think I know you read this one, right? The Native American Prayer Trees of Colorado.
I did.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's got some wonderful history, and like all of my books, it's got references to historical facts that really should be passed on from one generation to the next, and and many of them are at risk of being lost to history.
Yeah.
So if we can pass that on, especially to the younger generations, and that's what was nice and kind of the focus with book 3, Zach Box and the Pearls of Pleiades. This is book 1 of a planned 5-book series called the Zach Box Saucer series. So Zach is the captain of a flying saucer, needs to return to Pleiades, and I'm right now writing chapter 2 of book 2. And so his crew returns, and they're finding another flying saucer buried underneath the Sleeping Ute Mountain down south of Cortez, Colorado. So they're now going to need another crew for that one. But one of the things I should mention here, and I think I sent this to you, Becca. If not, it's on my website. You can download it. But I wrote a STEM study guide, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. So the study guide is for students and teachers, but it can also be for parents, especially if they're doing homeschool. And if you're interested in some supplemental reading, for maybe a summer reading program or extension program, this STEM study guide, each chapter, there's 12 chapters and they follow the hero's journey. So there's 6 learning objectives for each chapter. So as you're reading through the book, there's 36 learning objectives, all tied to either science, technology, engineering, or math. And when we get the in full 5-book series finished, there'll be 180 STEM study guides. That probably won't be done for another 3 or 4 years, though. So trying to do one here.
Get on it.
Yeah, I guess I better get off the call and get back to writing chapter 2.
You have told me about the study guides, and I've actually provided that to the high school just across the street here. They have a English class for if you're going to take college English while you're still in high school. So I provided it to that teacher because I figured she would share it around, and then I've provided it to a couple moms that are doing homeschooling here in our area. So yeah, that's
well. Thank you for doing that. Is that last slide still up where I can point out my email address down at the bottom, and then my website? It's an easy one to remember, jwander.com. And on the home page, the first page, you can just scroll down the bottom. It says download STEM study guide here. So you can just download it. It's not copyrighted. I intentionally wanted it, to be downloaded and shared for free and shared. Okay. So please feel free to look at that, or shoot me an email. If you say, hey, John, I can't find this, or if you have a follow-up question, I always love to hear from readers.
Or to let you know about the pudding choice.
That's right. Well, have a good rest of your day.
Yep, John, it's been great talking to you, and I hope you have a great day. And I guess we will say part our ways for now.